Hey everyone, in the video today we're going to be shooting in some nasty, harsh midday light, and I'll give you a few pointers and tips on what you can still photograph on days just like this. If you enjoy the video, please consider subscribing and check out the link in the description below to download some raw files from the things that we're going to shoot in the video today. All right, let's go. Now, if you're familiar with my work, you know that I'm a sucker for big dramatic landscapes, mountain peaks, lush rainforests, big dramatic skies. I just love that stuff. It's where my passion is. It's what moves me and stirs that emotion inside of me. And I think that's what brings out my best work when I'm feeling the landscape. I have shot my fair share of intimate photographs over the years. Now, when I say intimate photographs, intimate nature, it's those scenes which, the way I describe it is basically a scene that doesn't include the sky, and you're showcasing those finer, intricate details of what makes up the grander landscape. These types of scenes are perfect to shoot on days like today, where we have that harsh light, could be middle of the day, and you're not in the grand landscape. And let's face it, most of us probably don't live in a place that does have that grand scenery. I'm very fortunate that I do. I moved from Australia to New Zealand to be around these big, impressive landscapes. But I know the reality is that most people aren't in such environments. There is definitely a movement at the moment of more and more of these intimate scenes being shot, and I can totally understand why, because it really allows you to get out and create some images and have fun with the camera without needing, you know, great light or a big impressive scene. So where I am today is by the lakefront here, where I live in Te Anau, Fiordland, South Island of New Zealand. And I've shot here before, so I'm kind of cheating because I know there's a few interesting things here we're going to look at. The main one I want to share with you is this iridescent sheen which we get in the special little portion of the lake, coming from natural oils seeping out from decomposing woods and leaking out onto the shoreline and giving us a very subtle rainbow color in the sand. Now check this out, have a look at this. And it's all natural, so it's not like we're shooting some oil spill here or anything like that. Now don't get me wrong, I know that for most of us you're not going to be able to go out and do that either, because it's quite a rare thing. So we're going to look at that, but then we're going to look at some textures in the sand, as well as some of the bulrushes and plant life, and just see what we can do with this nasty light. We're not going to use a polarizer, we're not using filters, we're just going to have the camera, a couple of different lenses, we'll see what we can find. So shooting these intimate scenes, it's all about the finer details. You don't have to worry about covering a large area. It's looking down at the ground and exploring the landscape inch by inch, analysing the textures and colours and patterns that it might interest you. So just walking out here, aside from the iridescent sheen that we're going to spend the most time on, I've noticed some interesting sand textures and all these patterns and textures through the bulrushes, and even some of the manuka trees over there. So I've already analysed and spotted a few interesting things which I might want to point the lens at. The key is to isolate the scene. We're not really going wide here. We're going to use a telephoto, a mid-range zoom, get in tight, and we're photographing the scene within the grand scene. That's what it is all about. So let's see what we can find. I'll try to take a few images here and have a fun time. So lens choice, it's either going to be the 100 to 400 or the 28 to 75, the Tamron here. Might start with that just because it is the lens that I've got on. As always, I'm not using a tripod. So look at these patterns here in this sheen, all right? But it's covering a large area. We've got the wide angle on the GoPro here. I want to zoom in and see what we can find within that grand area, and there's so much of it to work with. Compositionally, this is the challenge. You're trying to find something that's going to flow and lead the eye and be of interest. One of the things I see with even aerials or shooting these intimate scenes is, to me, it's not good enough to just photograph it and just get a concoction of different lines, shapes and textures. You still really want to have a point for the eye to finish up on. So that's the challenge today. What lines and shapes do we have? Do we have any main subject matter there that the eye can flow to and take in? I think that's really important with this type of imagery. All right, now you might be thinking, man, that harsh sunlight's got to be a pain. Should be using a polarizer. The harsh light is actually a blessing. We're going to use that to draw the eye in. I think it's really important in your images to have a portion of dark as well as a portion of light. We're using the light to lead the eye. You can see here, but when we move on certain angles, the way that the highlights shift on the water surface there, on that sheen. So that's going to really help us dictate the compositions that we go with. Now, I've been looking through with the 28 to 75. I think I want to go tighter again. So I'm going to throw the 100 to 400 on. Really zone in and isolate a small portion of the scene and try and find a frame where I can lead the eye to a certain point. Usually when you're photographing a flat surface like this with a top-down perspective, you wouldn't be too concerned about depth of field, having a narrow aperture. I will say though, in this case, there is still a bit of depth of field because we might be incorporating some of the rocks or even some of the reeds, and they are sticking up higher than the flat surface below. And with that compressed lens, it instantly creates a pretty large depth of field. So I'm still going to be shooting around f16, f22, somewhere like that. But again, because of the harsh light, we're not going to have a problem getting the shutter speed, a fast enough shutter speed to be handheld. Now, it makes a huge difference the angle that we shoot on. As I'm zooming in on certain areas that have some interest to it, I'm moving myself left and right, up and down, and there's a dramatic effect in the highlights, but also the way the colors come out across the surface there. So that's really playing a key role. So we're just going to move along here and see what else we can find. As I said earlier, the hardest thing with this type of photography is getting something there for the eye to follow along compositionally. So the line in this frame I really enjoyed. Using rocks was a good way to also give the viewer something to interpret, so it wasn't completely abstract. So that was something I kept on getting drawn to, these different stones, and just trying to find patterns and lines in the sheen for the eye to flow through, and then balancing out the frame as much as possible. I even found a leaf here at this point. It wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing leaf, but again, some other subject matter. I really like the interesting lines here, and there's a natural balance by having the open line on the right and then that silver line on the left. So I quite like that frame. Definitely mucked around with that area for a little bit. Some of the colors were just phenomenal, but was there enough of a frame there to make an interesting photograph? I liked here these small breaks in the surface, and it was quite interesting observing this up close. Incredibly abstract. This was one of my favorite frames here, the driftwood with the beautiful textures and colors, and then of course that wonderful little splash of color there of those fragments. Looking along the sand, it was amazing some of the patterns I could find. Keeping in mind, this isn't a beach, this is a lake, but yeah, this was quite phenomenal. Very abstract, so again, I just looked for some little details, stones and leaves. And then the bulrushes, this was something I really enjoyed. I'm loving the colours here and the texture on these rushes, and I've just started doing a intentional camera movement. So go on f32, ISO 50 and 1/6 of a second. You can see I'm just panning in the direction that they're moving and then shooting and getting an intentional blur there, and it's really rendering a nice texture and just accentuating all the lines and details. Here we go. I've spent about an hour just walking along a small section here, only about 20 or 30 feet. It's actually a really good way just to get out with the camera and have some fun in nature, regardless of whether you keep an image or not. Don't forget to download those raw files, leave any comments and questions below, and I'll see you in the next video.